So welcome everybody to the first ethics symposium, but this is actually the second international symposium on trials within cohorts. The first one was here in London 2 years ago, and what happened was we had a fantastic collection of people who were interested in using the design and who and some of the people who were already using it, but every conversation ended with, well, is that ethical? And everybody would look at each other. So we realised the second symposium needed to be on ethics. So my name's Clare Relton. I work with John up in Sheffield, at the University of Sheffield. So welcome. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers from all parts of the world and an amazing audience as well. So we're guaranteed, I think, to have an extremely interesting couple of days. In terms of housekeeping, you've all got the programme, so you know when you're going to get watered and fed. If there's any issues, Catherine McKellar's out there, so please do go and talk to her. Fire exits, I think you go up the stairs as soon as you can. There's ladies' loos just round and gents' loos just round the corner there. We've got some posters that are around. I think it's about 8 or 9 posters, I think. They're going to be presented during the lunchtime. I'd like to thank the funders who've actually made this symposium possible. So the Wellcome Trust has provided the bulk of the funding, but we've also got a little bit of funding from the NIHR Clark for Yorkshire and Humber. So, trials within cohorts, I think sure many of you know what they are, but I just thought I'd whistle-stop through what they are. So, a large observational cohort of people with a condition of interest, regular measurement of outcomes over time. So, as John points out, it's a cohort which then provides the capacity for multiple trials, either at the same time or different times. And then for each trial embedded within the cohort, you identify those that are eligible, what subset of the cohort is eligible for your trial. You randomly select those for the trial intervention. Careful use of words. John and I discussed random selection, or is it random allocation of all, or random selection of some? So we chose to describe it as random selection of some for the intervention arm, so the new treatment or the intervention being trialled. And then comparison of their outcomes with those who are eligible who could have been randomly selected but weren't. And then we put in this phrase that we thought informed consent should be patient-centred. Probably not a wise choice of words, but it was the best we could come up with at the time. So just a very broad differentiation between trials within cohorts and the standard approach. So as you know, in the standard approach to trials, each trial goes out and recruits its own population, which is then disbanded at the end of the trial. And then next trial, all that effort put into recruiting, and then the populations disband. And full information, that phrase, interesting phrase, which we'll be unpacking over the next couple of days, and consent to all the different possible things that might happen to them in the trial is given upfront prior to randomization. Whereas trials within cohorts approach uses cohorts where everybody's followed up longer term, which then facilitate multiple trials, but the information, i.e. what is conveyed to people, to whom and when, is actually tailored to the time and the person. What's going to happen to that person? Trying to make it centred on the person, relevant to the person. What's going to happen to them? So, at Sheffield, after we piloted the design, we actually were very lucky to get some NIHR Clark funding to play out the design in obesity. So we created something called the South Yorkshire Cohort, which is now the Yorkshire Health Study. And in the protocol, which is published in BMC Public Health there, we were very careful to elucidate 4 different types of consents. So consent for data to be used to help the NHS improve long-term health. So that's what people thought they were doing by participating in the study. For consent to be contacted by us, the researchers, for whatever purpose. And that this one, we had probably about 3 months discussion about this phrase, I think. Consent that the information they provide can be used to look at the benefit of health treatments. So it's not saying actually you're not going to get something or you might get something. It just says the information you're going to give us is going to be used to look at the benefit of health treatments. It's going to be used for research and then access to health records. So we put this one in because we didn't think we'd get through ethics without it. I seem to remember was the conversation. But I think this is a sort of, I think it'd be interesting to revisit this one. So that's how, in Sheffield, that's how we've been conceptualising the design. So after piloting it, we then got it published in the BMJ. But yeah, so I'm going to step a little bit further back and talk about why on earth we came up with this design. So we both had prior experience of trials before we started the conversation about this. So John, as you know, was chair of the HTA commissioning board here in the UK and has commissioned hundreds, if not thousands, of trials. And I remember him saying, "Hey, let's have a cohort." And I had an incredibly, very, very different experience of trials in that I'd actually been a clinician inside a double-blind, placebo-randomized controlled trial. And I observed that as soon as the trial started, everybody started behaving differently to normal clinical practice. I remember thinking, well, what's going on here? I thought trials were meant to inform routine practice. If everybody starts playing a different game, then what on earth are we measuring? So it set up a whole list of questions, which I wrote down on a side of A4, which I'm still addressing, actually, I think. When I started my master's, I had the luck to actually design a trial. So I used a standard design, a standard pragmatic design, where a treatment was compared to usual care. And it recruited, and okay. But I remember going to a trial management meeting, and the woman doing the recruiting nurse, when we came to say, "Hey, how's recruitment going, Bernadette?" She actually started tearing up and crying. And I was thinking, oh gosh, what's happening? And she said, it's awful. So these people with fibromyalgia, they agreed to take part in the study. They come up to Barnsley Hospital, to the rheumatology department. I take all the outcome measures from them. I do the tender point count. So these are people with chronic pain, chronic depression, etc. And then I have to, and if they're eligible for the trial, I then have to go into a little room, pick up a little brown envelope. And she said, every time I pick up that envelope, I pray they're going to get the new treatment, because I know the reason why they've come up to the hospital is to get the new treatment. Because if they wanted usual care, they would have just stayed at home. So and she found it really difficult, because she knew the reason why people took part in the trial. That was the primary reason. There may have been some altruism there, but the primary reason that drove them there was actually the desire for the new treatment. So I remember thinking, well, okay, the next trial I design, I don't want to do that, because that doesn't seem ethical. Might have got through the ethics boards, etc. But hey, it's and the interesting thing was, when we looked at the results, the group in the intervention group, their outcomes improved, but those in the usual care group actually declined. And we didn't know if that was to do to the treatment, due to the actual condition, i.e. people with that particular condition declined, which from my review of the literature, it doesn't appear to be that way, or if it was actually an impact of disappointment. So I don't know. So those are the experiences we had, very, very different. So it was a challenge, actually piloting the design. I seem to remember we spent about 9 months with going through scientific review. And I don't know if John remembers it, but it was basically a bit of a standoff in the end. It was, yes. So, but we did get through scientific review in a manner of speaking, and then we went to the ethics committee. It was bounced out the first time, partly because they said, well, we just don't know what this is, and partly I think it was unfamiliarity with the design, but partly lack of coherence in my ability to articulate it. But anyway, we got it, and we managed to pilot the design, and it seemed to work okay, so we then had the PMJ publication. Since that publication in 2010, the design has actually evolved. It's been very exciting watching how different people in different countries and different settings have adapted to the design and improved upon it, I think, in some senses. So first thing we did was 2 years ago, we actually decided to rebrand the name since the actual original name was the Cohort Multiple RCT, which we knew at the time was a terrible name. And nobody in the UK can remember it. People in Holland seem to be able to remember it, but people would say to me, yeah, that design multiple, anyway. So with the help of the people from Holland, we came up with the idea of calling it Trials Within Cohorts with the acronym TWICS, and then everybody goes, oh yes, TWICS, that's much easier. And then over in Holland, the stage consent design that Danny and his colleagues have been have created, that's a very interesting evolution of the design, which I think is going to be proving to be very popular. So yes, so lots of different ways of characterising TWICS. So how's it being used? Well, it's now being used in 7 different countries. in a whole range of different settings, both hospital and non-hospital, and lots of different populations and conditions, so ADHD, cancer, depression, early life, Hep C, etc. So quite a variety. And the interventions that are currently being trialled or where there's funding and ethics review approval for over the last few years, that's not an exclusive list. So these are all studies that are using the trials within cohorts design that have got funding and ethics approval. I know there's quite a few where people have got plans, and there's quite a few people in the room, I think, who've got plans to use it. So I haven't included those there.
So, for instance, right, is there a little list somewhere we could look up?
So there is I've started a website called www.twix.global.
And it's on there?
Well, yeah, but it's not definitive, and it needs lots of work, and it will keep on going out of date, but it's got some of them up there. And if you've got any suggestions about how to improve that website, please do come and let me know. And the funders have been a whole variety of funders, so over in the Canada, the CIHR, over in the UK, the NIHR, and also some charities as well, condition-based, so that like the big lottery, the Born in Bradford Better Start, you've just got a large amount of big lottery funding, haven't you? So a whole variety of different funders. So yes, as I mentioned in the first Twix Symposium, every interesting conversation ended with, yes, but is it ethical? And everybody looking at each other. So the purpose of this symposium is to provide a forum for us to discuss questions relating to the ethics of this approach and share perspectives, as you've already heard, John, and the northern perspective on Twix. And we've got an amazing group of people here today. So we've got academics, trialists, clinicians, we've got regulators, we've got commissioners, we've got people from MHRA, the HRA. We've got a fantastic range of perspectives. And we've got people who are going to be reporting patient perspectives as well on the design. So, and then we're going to be discussing how Twix relates to the current ethical framework. And tomorrow afternoon, we're hoping to get to a point where we're going to be able to identify what needs to happen next, what conceptual and empirical research needs to happen next. So that's basically tomorrow afternoon is going to be given up to that. So you've got your programme, so I don't need to talk about that. Actually, yeah, I just wanted to say, so Merrick's going to be following me, giving a much bigger, higher view with regards to trial structures. And then we've got our first keynote speaker, James, who's going to be talking about randomisation without consent. I met my son yesterday, and he said, so what are you doing in London, Mum? And I said, oh, doing this symposium. And I said, oh, here's the programme. And he went, randomisation without consent. Ooh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? And I was thinking, yeah, it's all about the language, isn't it? And so I started to try to explain to him, actually, that is an abbreviation of a whole really complex psychodrama between. Anyway, so, but it's anyway, so you're going to be starting us off with that. And then I thought it'd be good to actually have some real-life examples of Twix that have been up and running for a good few years. So we've got Rodolphe, who's come over from Canada to talk about, he's got one of the first cohorts, one of the first studies that used Twix. And then we've got Professor Anne May from Utrecht, who's going to be giving a little overview of what's going on in Utrecht so, and then in the afternoon, we've got more bioethicists. And tomorrow, just wanted to mention, we weren't able to get this room for 2 days, unfortunately. So tomorrow we're going to be in the Friends Meeting House. So if you come after the Wellcome Trust and turn right, cross over the road carefully, that's the Friends Meeting House, and that's where we're going to be tomorrow. So so that's tomorrow. So just before I finish, I just wanted to say that I think it's going to be really important that we are very careful about how we use language. So the example of the conversation with my son being an example of that. So in the words that we use, we're coming from many different perspectives, many different cultural backgrounds, many different countries. So we've got our own language, we've got our own jargon. So I think I think it's very important, if you don't understand what somebody means by a particular term, don't worry, put your hand up and say, can you just define that, please? And I think that should happen a lot, because if we get a coherent language, then we can move forward. If we're all talking, Babel-wise, we're going to end up not being any further forward. So there's loads of I'm just thinking about the different design language we use. So pragmatic designs, and I was wondering actually about getting a flip chart up and actually just starting to list all the different designs and just with quick summaries. So because I think some of us know most of these. I don't think anybody actually understands all of them. And then so informed consent, fully informed consent. This one, oh my God. So when I started off in research 13, 40 years ago, and the people said, I said, I'm designing a trial. People said, well, have you got fully informed consent? Have you got fully informed consent? So I went, fully? So I tried to find where this word fully informed consent is. It's not there. I've looked through all the guidelines. So there's this, sort of common parlance that you have to give fully informed consent. So patient-centered consent, that's what we came up with. Tailored disclosure is my current favourite at the moment. Proportionate consent, I think the regulators, the HRA, are going to be talking about that. It's a great term, and they're applying it to a particular subset, a particular approach to informed consent, which is towards but not the same as TWICs. Randomisation without consent, broad consent, pre-randomisation broad consent. So if you are confused, don't worry, it is confusing. But I think there are, hopefully over the next day or so, there's going to be certain key terms that we're going to need to nail and all have a collective understanding and agreement as to what they mean.
What you're reading nowadays is adequate informed consent.
Okay, great. Valid, adequate. We'll add them to the list. And then consent to what? So John put up a list of different types of consent. So I put these up. So this is the person going, what on earth am I consenting to? Yeah. Okay. To be randomised. Do you consent to be randomised? Would you like to have consent to be randomised to 2 different types of lunch? It's a bit weird, isn't it? So, okay. So a lot of what the language you use is focused on the fact that eventually we're going to have to report our trials using consort. So fantastic, nice symmetrical design, lots of really important information, but who's been told what and when? And why do these numbers always decline from massive numbers here to a few numbers there? Well, it's because they've met people, they've had interactions, they've been given information, and consent has been sought. So one of the things that I would love to see is some sort of extension or addition to consort where we actually say who speaks to who, when, and what do they say. I came across this, so Amanda Hunn, I think, sent this to me. Thank you, Amanda. So where on the right-hand side, it's actually who the patient has contact with. So who's involved in what process. So the physiotherapist, the researcher, etc. So I thought that was nice. But I think we need another column here with the information that was given to whom? To the control group, to the intervention group, to the cohort, whatever. So I'm going to finish there and hand over to Merrick. Hi.
No, just 2 comments. I mean, you also have opt-out consent. That's the other kind of way of thinking.
Opt-out consent.
Opt-out consent, so people opt out from randomization, for example. Okay. And the other thing I want to note is there's also other ways of getting consent, rather than the current thing is, you're being randomized, can you please fill this long, read this long consent form. You can also envisage a system where if you go to your general practice for example, you're being told this practice is engaged in randomized trials, etc. So also thinking differently about the process of obtaining consent, rather than the current model of giving very long, complex consent forms.
Yes. Okay. So yes, who gives what consent when? Is it at the cluster level or the operational level? Yeah, or the individual level. Can you just say your name and where you're from?
University of Manchester.
Oh, okay. Yes, of course. Okay.